Well then, the Giggle. Bi-Regeneration. Bet you ain't giggling now, or maybe, I don't know, some parts of the fandom definitely aren't. Certainly an unexpected idea, isn't it? Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Doctor Who episode review. In today's review, I'm going to be taking a look at the third and final episode of Doctor Who's 60th anniversary specials, including David Tennant as the Doctor, alongside Catherine Tate as Donna Noble. Now, I have in fact put off recording this review for a good week or two because I've been busy. It's in fact now a Friday night, so I've exchanged my regular cup of tea for a lovely gin and debonair. How lovely. I'm going to be celebrating the end of this rather bizarre era of Doctor Who, but also mourning the loss of good old David Tennant. Very much like my other two reviews of Wild Blue Yonder and The Star Beast, it's just basically a sit-back, chill chat about the story, really. I've got a few notes, so it's just my casual natterings about the story, really. Some of those thoughts may be more coherent than others. So the 60th anniversary specials conclude with the Giggle, once more written by Russell T Davies, seeing the Doctor going head-to-head with the Toymaker. Very much like Wild Blue Yonder, I went into this story with very broad expectations. Both episodes gave me the impression that there was going to be a lot more than they initially let on with the promotional material. Then the episode aired. It wasn't really what I was expecting, but it did new things, but not the things that I was expecting from an anniversary story. I discussed this within the previous review, and I think it is getting rather impossible now to adequately represent Doctor Who within an anniversary special and covering all the various eras. So I think that stories like this continue to celebrate the show, but at the same time do take the whole concept of an anniversary special to a different level. We've not really done episodes like this before, therefore I can completely understand why episodes like this may not be some people's cup of tea who are expecting cameos of old characters, cameos of the Doctor, but then again we do have a number of those within these stories. After all, the Toymaker is from the 1960s era of the show. We have the return of Melanie Bush within this story too, so it's not like that they've not acknowledged the past of the show. I just think it does anniversaries very differently to what we expect. Although it has to be said, we've got to episode 3 and no Matt Smith, which I wasn't getting my hopes up at all. But you know what, I did actually start to think that was going to happen towards the end. I did kind of hypnotise myself into thinking that it was likely, but and I'm not really disappointed because of that, because it was my own fault for kind of speculating too highly, but at the same time I appreciate what these stories do. And let's face it, who cares about other incarnations of the Doctor when you have none other than Trinity Wells the newsreader back again. Honestly, I'm so happy that Lachelle Carl is back in the role. She brings a comfort blanket of consistency to Doctor Who, and she was one of my favourite characters within the first era of Russell T Davies, although this time she's seemingly gone down the conspiracy theorist route in life, which is a shame. I hope you get well soon, Trinity. I'm going to place a bet now that they certainly didn't get Lachelle Carl back in the studio for literally just those 10 seconds of footage, so I'm very confident in saying, and I just hope that this is the case, that we will be seeing a lot more of Trinity within Ncuti's era of the show. We can only hope. Wherever Trinity's involved, it's going to be good. So the story can really split down the middle, to be honest, which I think is exactly how this review is going to go about. We're going to kind of ignore the ending until later on, as we have the bizarre Toymaker realm at the very beginning of the story, and then the unit ball games and Bi-Regeneration towards the later end of the story. I did enjoy the surreal nature of the opening half. It made the piece feel almost limitless in its storytelling, and I think that Neil Patrick Harris does such a great job as the new iteration of the Toymaker. I think he really does captivate with each and every scene, especially with that opening toy shop scene at the very beginning of the story. The Giggle itself, of course, the puppet being hidden in every screen, is also quite a sinister touch, and had it not been within a already quite packed anniversary Doctor Who special, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that being explored, since it is such a pivotal moment within media's history, and of course tying in the first TV broadcast I thought was a really lovely nod, given that Doctor Who is of course like the longest running science fiction TV show, which is a fitting theme for an anniversary special, I suppose. But I think it could have perhaps been used a little bit more, but I don't really dislike the story or anything because of that. And Unit's now got money. God knows where they got the budget from. It's got helicopters, giant skyscrapers, and of course lots of employees. And you know what, as soon as Kate Stewart appears, it does feel a lot more alive than previous encounters. I do think that Gemma Redgrave puts in one of her best performances within this story, and the Doctor reunion is lovely with that very strong hug. And of course we have that rather odd deactivation scene as well with the arm bracelet, which I think allows Gemma Redgrave to do something rather exciting with the character that we've not particularly seen them do with a new series Doctor Who before, kind of plummeting Kate Stewart into this rather difficult situation where she's exposing these vulnerabilities, I suppose, within her mind. I think the closest that we got to that in the past was the Zygon duplicate within the 12th Doctor era. We have her rather scary, untrusting outbursts, as well as thinking that all redheads are a part of a giant conspiracy, which, to be fair, she is right with that one. I've just realised I've not actually appeared in front of camera for quite a long time now, actually. But yeah, for those of you that have tuned in recent years, I am in fact ginger. That's why I made that joke. Context makes the joke make sense, and even then, it wasn't that funny. The episode itself just generally gives her a lot more to do, and I think that she seemed very tired as a character within Power of the Doctor, but within this story, even she just carries herself a lot more, I think. She has more of a presence than she did within the Power of the Doctor, but also she doesn't look as tired. I think it's very interesting seeing how these different eras do portray these reoccurring characters, the likes of Kate Stewart, who has now ran through Moffat's era into Chibnall's and now into Russell T Davies once again. Of course, Shirley is back too. It's nice to see a familiar face, and Mel, Bonnie Langford, it's brilliant. That moment where Tennant actually sees her for the first time is a really lovely moment, and their brief catch-up later on amongst the disaster is also really lovely. It's not too overdone, it's very well acted between them both. It's nice to have that little catch-up, a few references thrown in there as well, although I would have loved a good old Sixie reference thrown in there. I think that was certainly a missed opportunity. Something like, I don't know, since I last saw you dressed a lot better in that lovely Technicolor dream coat, and generally you had a lot more style, which I just realised that doesn't even work because she also travelled with Sylvester McCoy. But you know, hey ho. Yes, I will try to cram in as many Sixth Doctor references as possible in any review at all. I do find the whole new unit setup a little bit odd. We've got this new headquarters, a big laser cannon, which, yes, that does absolutely break international space laws, let me tell you now. We have helicopters, the Vlinks. What on earth is a Vlinks? I still don't know, having now watched the story. Anyway, we have Kate, we have Shirley, Mel getting a job after coming back to Earth, Ibrahim in there as well, Donna being offered a job. To me, absolutely all of this is heading towards something, surely. It feels like it's setting up something, or maybe it's just giving characters things to do. And as a result, it feels really substantive because of that. And I know that a unit spin-off has been speculated for a while now, and after seeing this story, I can kind of see it, but at the same time, I feel like a unit sort of series would require a very big budget, given that they are a very known organisation. Meanwhile, you had the likes of Torchwood that was meant to be undercover, although they ended up branding everything anyway, you know, so they weren't particularly too undercover, at least in Wales. So it delivers to two very different organisation drama, where you have now this version of unit which seems to be in the very centre of London. Everyone seemingly knows about them, and I think that that will be an interesting way to take a spin-off because of now seemingly the power that they have for some reason. I would love to know who Unit's insurance company is, honestly. The way that they go through buildings and headquarters is mad. The everyone is right concept, which was used at the very beginning of the story, was obviously a commentary on humanity now and how social media has basically driven the world insane, and you know what, it kind of works. But again, due to the external elements within this story, it being an anniversary special, it needing to fit literally everything in, including the entirety of a Doctor's era, into literally 3 hours of content, it dies a lot quicker than I would have wanted it to in any other Doctor Who era. I think it would have been something to explore in a lot more detail, and it would have been very beneficial because of that. But again, due to it being an anniversary special, you kind of see all of these exciting ideas being flung about to make the episode feel big and grand, but they don't really stick for long. The Prime Minister shouting, "Why should I care about you?" was a brief moment, which basically hit the rather brutal nail on the head. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that they actually needed to hire an actor for that bit. They should have just changed channels over at BBC News and screen grabbed a little bit of content from that from the last few years, and it would have basically carried exactly the same message anyway. So back onto the more comprehensible and less brutal world of the Toymaker, the scenes within the realm of the shop are brilliant. The twisting corridors, the nice character moments between Tennant and Tate, it certainly intrigues, although I also think it misleads a little bit as well, as style-wise I think it sets up a very different type of story that we see within the second half. Stooky Sue, what a woman. What a brilliant yet creepy woman. She's one of the highlights, along with her babbies. I think they're brilliant, and I think that it's something that will certainly stick with the younger Doctor Who fans, which is perfect. I hope that we do see more creepy practical effects within Ncuti's era of the show. I think the puppeteers do a really impressive job within this story. However, I do think that they really missed a trick with the theatre scene. Of course, it is very funny seeing the Toymaker perform the eras of the show. Again, Neil Patrick Harris captivates with each line in many unpredictable ways. The "well, that's alright then" gag is very funny. I thought it again hits the mark each and every time. The problem I have is with the puppets, and I know that a few people have mentioned this, I've seen on Twitter, and yes, I completely get what they were trying to say with the scene. Of course, all of the Doctor's companions in recent years have died, and it's to highlight that point of these brutal endings for these characters to probably taunt Donna or something like that. But because these characters are puppets and not the actual actors, within this moment you could have brought back virtually any character to perform this weird scene. After all, it's quite literally a Doctor Who toy box, and they just stuck to Amy, Clara and Bill. And again, I do really like the scene. I think it is a really lovely moment, and I completely get why they couldn't go through the whole show, because we would literally be there forever, plus any incredibly niche references wouldn't really make sense at all to the newer viewers, and it would only be there to satisfy sort of the longer term addicted Doctor Who fans. Yeah, let's just throw in, a Sarah Kingdom puppet in there just to really confuse people, although then again, they do mention Mavek Chen in the later half of the story, so I guess that point doesn't really work, does it? I do just think that it is a missed opportunity. Heck, even throw in some creepy cameos of random creatures within the rooms of the Toymaker's shop. I think that could have really worked. Or maybe even prisoners of the Toymaker have a Dalek in there, or I don't know, a Formassi from the Leisure Hive. Why not? You could have even had puppets of past Doctors there to taunt Tennant. I don't know, would that be a bit too much? Because I guess you could kind of excuse the age thing because they're sort of creations of the Toymaker. That would be quite cool. But yeah, maybe a bit too much, probably. Again though, maybe this is me just trying to make this episode into an anniversary special that kind of fits the structure of previous anniversary specials. But in reality, this one and the rest of the episodes are doing something a little bit different, and it feels fresh because of that. Although, I don't think for me, I think when I watch it, I kept on forgetting that the reason why these episodes kind of exist is because it's the 60th anniversary of the show. Russell T Davies' writing can be a little bit over the top at times, and I spoke about this within the previous reviews. I think Wobble Yonder I said about having confidence within the episodes, and the Giggle continues to show that confidence, although I do think it can be a little bit much at times, such as when the Toymaker says, "After all these years we meet again." That was a little bit too much for me. It was a bit, I don't want to use the word cringy, but evil cackling villain meets good old hero. It was a bit, it was a bit on the nose, and I think that over-the-topness does stand out quite a lot, especially when this era has came off the back of the previous era of the 13th Doctor, which wasn't really over-the-top at all. It played everything very close to its chest, and I kind of feel like it's a Doctor Who era that kind of turns the volume down a little bit. It's very cautious in the way that it delivers things, whilst simultaneously trying to deliver one of the most controversial plot arcs within the show's history. It's kind of silent but deadly. It's really odd. But I think either way, kind of coming directly, if I was doing a marathon of the eras, I think that coming into all of these 60th anniversary specials, it would kind of be a Doctor Who equivalent of Whiplash, because it's kind of two very starkly different styles instantly after one another. Meanwhile, 3 episodes later, the Toymaker dancing to the Spice Girls. What a moment. Excellently directed. Really fun. I think the highlight is when the unit soldiers get turned into the bouncy balls and then one of them falls into Shirley's hand and it screams. I thought that was brilliant. It wasn't too over the top, but when you really think about it, it's actually quite dark. And then of course all the petals, I thought that was really fun, and I just find it really funny that when we've seen all of these clips in the trailers where very early on, we didn't know the context, we didn't know the Spice Girls will be playing around the unit HQ, and it's definitely a highlight, and I think that, again, it continues to show that over-the-topness that we are probably going to have to get used to, when it comes to Russell coming back. I mean, next episode we've got singing goblins. What else could you want from life? Of course, within the Celestial Toymaker, the original Toymaker story, there was a number of games that were played, and if I remember right, some of the games were rather complex. I think there's a few mind puzzles in there. I do find it really interesting that Russell has opted for a less complex way of telling the Toymaker's story through simple card games and playing catch, which I didn't quite expect that to be the final Doctor Toymaker confrontation. Very simple, somewhat effective, but also I think absolutely done because of the time constraints within the story. I think when you're introducing a concept like Bi-Regeneration in there, you don't want a massive mind-bending Toymaker game thrown into the mix as well that is going to confuse the viewer even further. I feel like that is something that probably Big Finish would do, let's face it. I think that keeping the game simple kind of keeps the story on the straight and narrow, was not going absolutely overboard, and I feel like that is the difference right there between Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat. Although, to my credit, within the previous review I did speculate a number of things, most of them wrong. One thing that I did predict right was the return of the Toymaker through the salt being scattered at the end of the universe and him playing the game. I was quite proud that I predicted that, even though it's probably one of the easier things to predict for this third and final story. I also quite like how the 14th Doctor essentially signs his own death warrant by agreeing to play a card game with the Toymaker, and then as soon as he loses, by saying best of 3, that then made the Toymaker infer that it's only right that the next game should be played with the next Doctor, and it's logical, it makes sense. I mean, obviously the giant laser beam has something to do with the death as well, but I think that kind of being killed off and made to regenerate on a technicality of a simple rule within a game, it's a different way to go, isn't it? It makes a difference between soaking up the universe, radiation, falling off a telescope, dying of old age, having a dodgy heart operation, being shot by a Cyberman, needing some bat milk, getting poisoned by carrot juice. There are, of course, a number of little references within the story as well, mainly from the Toymaker, such as not playing games with the one who waits, whatever that means, the Master's tooth being picked up at the very end of the story, which is a little bit of a callback to the Sim Master, of course, alongside the 10th Doctor. I couldn't decide if it was a nice callback or a little bit repetitive. It's kind of a middle ground between the two. The Toymaker's threat at the very end of the story, such as my legions are coming, and of course something, a big task, being someone else's game. All of these things, much like the throwaway reference at the end of the Star Beast, being the Meep's boss sort of waiting or being interested to know that the Doctor has 2 hearts or something like that, it probably all nicely flows into Ncuti's era. So yes, I do like how the episodes are kind of connected in some way. It's one era into the next, and I think that now we have all 3 episodes, you can really kind of tell from a story perspective why they referred to this era in production as the bridge, because it does very much feel like the bridge between one era of the show, being everything before, into the new era of the show. The most interesting reference I thought personally was I've made a jigsaw of your history, do you like it? Which is something that the Toymaker says, which I know a few people have picked up on this, and who knows, with Russell you can kind of read into stuff, but is he inferring to something to do with the timeless child? Maybe changing the Doctor's past, altering it, something that was once present being undone? It's all very ambiguous, but I think that is on purpose, and maybe it's kind of Russell's little way of addressing the controversial things that went on within 13's era, and somehow kind of saying that both of those beliefs still kind of apply, even though, I mean, I don't really want to go into it too much, but, it doesn't really change much, but then obviously people aren't happy that there might be Doctors before the first Doctor and all of that, even though they won't be because he can't remember them anyway, so to the first Doctor, he still is the first, whatever. I think that with all of that, I think that the way that it's addressed within this story, it opens up that acceptance to, you can basically believe whatever you want, which, let's face it, you were able to do that anyway. Because Doctor Who's a TV show, there's no one telling you what you can and can't sort of accept as Doctor Who canon. The canon is your own. Blow the canon wherever you want. Right then, time to talk about this regeneration. That was me pouring another drink. I've just realised I'm saying this like it's such a big thing and that I'm absolutely devastated. I'm not. I think I've kind of concluded that there's not really much that Doctor Who can do these days that is going to trigger a massive emotion from me to say that I'm never going to watch ever again, simply because I feel like, especially over the past few years, my mind has kind of shifted. Doctor Who's not the be-all end-all, it's a TV show, and at the end of the day, there's bigger things going on, and if there's a storyline I don't like, then I can just pretend it doesn't exist, and it just makes my life a lot easier for it, I think. So the regeneration does certainly happen a lot earlier than some may have thought. Personally, I did kind of expect it to happen a little bit earlier. I was definitely expecting something different, and we certainly got that. And before we talk about the actual concept itself, can we just imagine that we are Ncuti Gatwa for the moment? It's like, oh yeah, your first scene, you regenerate, however, David Tennant is still right there. In fact, David Tennant is right next to you. You're going to share your first ever scene as the Doctor, which is already quite a lot of pressure to make that impact with the audience, standing right next to the man who could quite easily be dubbed one of the genre's most popular incarnations of all time. Good luck. Action. You know, it's one of them things that I feel like Ncuti had such a big job to do here, and I do kind of feel sorry for him, but he definitely makes it pay off. The whole idea of 14 being shot down really suddenly, I do quite like that. I had a feeling it will be something like that, to be honest, a bit brutal, and a major departure from the big farewell tour that we got to see within the end of time. Imagine telling a Doctor Who fan a number of years ago that the current Doctor, who is David Tennant, will die in the hands of Donna Noble and Melanie Bush. It's something of which that sounds very surreal, but you know, it works quite well. My favourite moment is in fact the bit where Catherine Tate storms up towards the Doctor and shouts, "You can do what you like to me, he's not dying alone," or something like that. I thought it was a really nicely performed moment. If anything, actually steals the limelight from Tennant a little bit, because it really hurts each time I watch it. It's a really nicely delivered line, and I think that Catherine Tate does an excellent performance there. Equally, Tennant's performance is really nice. Again, as I mentioned within the review of Wild Blue Yonder, it does feel a lot more mature, a lot more measured, and a lot more content in identity, which is odd, even though that this Doctor is kind of struggling to deal with who he actually is anymore. And again, it shows a massive character development, I think, from the 10th Doctor, who was a little bit childish at times, a little bit immature, and of course he loved himself, didn't he? He didn't want to go, as he infamously says at the end, but we've kind of came full circle in many ways with that character. So now for the Bi-Regeneration, and you know what, it's new, and I was getting a little bit tired of the standard regeneration, you know, just the orangey glow, boom, oh, new person appears. I think that they have at least tried to direct it a little bit differently in recent years, such as, say, 12 into 13, I think that worked quite well. Even 13 into 14, obviously that was outside, so that was different, although it was still quite a similar concept. So it can certainly be credited for doing things differently. Although personally for me, the one problem that I do have with the Bi-Regeneration is not the concept itself, it's the way that it is visualised. It's a little bit odd. Although it is funny, I do think that the pull my arms gag is a little bit weird. I don't think it quite delivered the big impact of a usual regeneration with the person bursting into flames, you know, and the music going all excitable. You know, it doesn't have the same delivery, it doesn't have the same energy. It's kind of just this mysterious moment that happens, although I don't think there are many ways that you can visualise the concept of a Bi-Regeneration without making the incoming Doctor look like a clone or extension of the Tennant Doctor, which obviously had to be avoided as thematically that wouldn't really look great. It would still make 14 seem like the present Doctor, and then this new person coming in is a little bit of an imposter or an extension of them. So physically splitting the character down the middle does make a lot more sense, and it makes it feel a lot more equal, because imagine, say, if Ncuti grew like the Hand does, you know, when the duplicate Doctor was created in whatever episode that was, at Journey's End. I feel like had they done that, it would have had rather negative connotations to it. It's a very similar thing to the TARDIS scene at the very end, such as Russell making very clear within the behind the scenes that Ncuti's TARDIS is still the TARDIS that we've had since 1963, and not a duplicate clone TARDIS of the current one. It is still the original, because I think it's very important to keep that originality, simply because, you know, having this new Doctor going off and seemingly being a clone of the current one would, yeah, it would kind of feel like we're getting almost a bootleg Doctor. I did see a few people comment that it feels odd that we've had a regeneration, but it loses the impact because there is that zero sense of loss. There isn't really any death, and Tennant is still kicking around. And again, I do get that, although my personal headcanon kind of helped me come to terms with the concept, is that this story sees the origin of the curator, and the Tennant Doctor goes on to be the curator. That's the way that I've visualised it. I know a few people have said maybe this current version of 14 kind of fades away over time once he comes to terms with his trauma. I think that kind of makes sense as well, although I kind of like the curator idea, to be honest. I've also seen a few people saying that the Bi-Regeneration does take the attention away from Ncuti in his opening moments, and that is other people's opinions, and that is completely fine, I respect that, although I think my personal perspective is I think that Ncuti absolutely steals the show. I feel like as soon as he appears, there is an energy, it's an incredible performance, he's a beam of light within each scene, and personally I feel like Tennant's Doctor is a little bit tired towards the end. Not that the performance isn't any good, it's brilliant, it's Tennant, of course it's going to be. However, I do feel like Tennant subtly takes a little bit of a step back. He seems like he's let go of something as soon as Ncuti comes along. He's a little bit emotional, a bit more tired, Donna is supporting him, and it kind of makes sense because, as Donna says within the story, he's been going on and on and on, and he's never actually stopped. He's got kind of the Time Lord equivalent of burnout, and now he's going to kind of come to terms with his emotions, which I think works quite well. Although at the same time I do think it is quite a bold move to say, right, all of this trauma that you've had for many, many series with multiple losses and you've never stopped and all of that, we're going to deal with that off camera. And we've essentially put a pause button on a period of the show's history with the Doctor coming to terms with his trauma, and then we're picking up with Ncuti after that trauma has been rectified. It kind of feels like a bit of the Doctor's past now, a bit like the Time War up until the Day of the Doctor at least. It kind of feels like we have a period of time within the Doctor's life where we're not prying in on that. Obviously, he's a fictional character, but it feels like that this Doctor can now go away and heal alone. And we're not really going to know how he does that. We're not going to know how he comes to terms with those emotions, other than the little hints and suggestions that we get within the story. I think that does kind of make sense, but it also means that we're going into Ncuti's era, hopefully with big, bold, new energy, and he's going to be not necessarily forgetting his past or anything, but again, it feels like a reboot, it feels like something new, it feels like, hopefully for the newcomers that are coming in, which fingers crossed there'll be quite a lot of, it feels like we're not going to get a character that is absolutely weighed down by everything that's happened in the past, which, let's face it, in the new series of the show in particular, it feels like the Doctor has been kicked time and time and time again, and he just needs some time out. When I was mentioning earlier the regeneration having zero sense of loss because Tennant is still kicking around, I do find it really interesting because when I finished watching this story for the first time, I had this overwhelming feeling, and I feel like this can be interpreted in a really negative way because, especially with Doctor Who is dead and then the date 1963 to whatever has been floated around the internet now for many, many years, but I did genuinely feel like a part of my childhood died in this story. And it may sound a little bit dramatic, but I mean it in a nice way. I feel like the show that I knew is gone, and I feel like that era that I grew up with is gone. I feel like it's finally been put to rest in a peaceful manner. I feel like it's something of which that the character has come to terms with, all the trauma, all the events that have happened. It feels like I've said goodbye to the show that I used to know. And then at the same time, it's looking towards the future. I feel like whatever Doctor Who is about to happen with the Christmas special onwards, I feel like it is a new iteration of the show. It's a new reboot, and I feel like it's almost as if, for me, it's as if you're kind of watching Survival and you see that scene with the 10th Doctor and Ace walking away at the very end, kind of knowing that Doctor Who's not going to come back until 2005 with that context whilst actually watching Survival. It feels like an end, a proper end, and I find that really soothing. I like the fact that the 10th Doctor has kind of came back. Clearly some of those struggles are still there within this character, but then ultimately those little thematic ties with the script, the fact that we have that little nod saying, I think he says to Rose on, Bad Wolf Bay, he says that, oh, you're going to be living a day-to-day life or something like that. It's an adventure of which that I can never have. And then, of course, there's a lovely parallel within this story of Donna saying, you can now have the life that you've never had. And, of course, we have all those acknowledgements to the characters that we've lost throughout the years between Ncuti and Tennant, which I thought was a really lovely scene. It does. It feels like sort of a part of my childhood, that era has gone now. And I like that. I like the fact that it's almost been put to bed. And in a really weird way, I kind of feel like right now would be a perfect opportunity if I wanted to, if it was like a commitment, which it's not because it's a TV show. But I feel like for me, if I wanted to stop watching, this would be the perfect time to tap out in a rather satisfactory way to kind of go, you know what, my version of Doctor Who's done. I'm going to leave now and let it kind of go on to its new era, but I'm not going to be watching along. Although I am going to be watching along. In fact, I'm very, very excited for the new era. But equally at the same time, I think it's going to feel very, very different. And I think it is about time. I think it really is, because I think the show itself has been tired for quite a long time. And I'm really, really hoping that this new era has an energy and enthusiasm that I think has been lacking for years, I'll be honest. Every time I think of criticisms for the 60th anniversary as a whole, I think, oh, I wish we did this, I wish we did this. And it's the problem of having 3 episodes, and I keep coming back to the logic of, what do I want? Do I want David Tennant back? Do I want Catherine Tate back? Do I want to have the existence of these 3 stories or not? Because that is the alternative, that is the thing. Do I actually want these 3 episodes to celebrate the 60th? Do I want them to exist? Or do I want no episodes at all from this year? Because I don't think there was ever going to be the chance that this era was going to be any bigger. But I think it's a very fair criticism to say that the one thing that probably would have benefited all 3 of these stories is more time to actually breathe. Not necessarily a massive series or anything like that, maybe being extended to 5 episodes, 6 at an absolute most, just to give the series more time to breathe, do a few more things, and then you could have had some of these themes being explored a little bit more, such as the first televisation of the puppet, such as, society thinking they're all right, such as the weird sort of spooky tropes seen within Wild Blue Yonder. It's simply, ironically, it doesn't stop. All of the episodes are literally tied together. Both the Doctor and Donna do not change costumes throughout the entirety of it, which is incredibly fitting for character options. Come on, guys. Release something, please. But in a rather satisfying way, it very much matches what Donna says within the story. You don't stop. Both of the main protagonists do not stop throughout all 3 of these episodes. It's a consistent run from beginning to end. And I think that it does definitely have strengths. They are 3 incredibly strong stories, arguably 3 of the strongest stories the show has produced in many, many years. I just think at the same time that a lot of things have been sacrificed because of that. We could have explored 14 a little bit more. I think that would have been really rewarding to kind of dig into this much more layered version of the Tennant Doctor. I think it would be fair to say. It would have been lovely to see more with Donna as well, but I think ultimately the moments that we did get I now cherish because they are so limited. This is a very special era. Equally the likes of Shirley, of course she's now been in 2 episodes, but I don't feel like we really know the character yet, which is really unusual, and I hope that she does come back in the future. And of course it also sets up Ncuti as well. A lot of the story's runtime at the very end is also setting up this new era, which I do think that, again, just lingering on that scene with Tennant surrounded by the nobles in the garden a little bit longer, as opposed to directly cutting back to Ncuti again. It would have even been nice just to see the TARDIS maybe floating in the vortex. Just to kind of divide the scene up, because we do literally go from the garden to the TARDIS within moments. I feel like just having a few more seconds pause, just to let that moment last a little bit longer, I think would have been really beneficial. So again, it's another episode that in the future, I would love to see a cut of the story that's not sort of within the constraints of a TV broadcast. And I'd be very interested to see across all 3 of these stories how many scenes have actually been left on the cutting room floor. Because I have a feeling that there's either going to be absolutely loads of content that has been cut, or very, very little, and the stories were designed very precisely to fit within that duration. It's going to be one of the 2, I think. As I say, I do find it rather unusual that they've gone and got this entity, like the Toymaker. They could have done anything with this character. They could have done a really surreal, big game, a big grand finale. But if anything, by playing catch, it gets everything over and done with quite quickly. But then at the same time, the big benefit of that is being able to focus on Ncuti's Doctor a little bit more, and those interesting reactions that he has to those around him, the likes of the companions. It's interesting not only having 2 Doctors share the same and seen together, literally from the very beginning of their era, but also at the same time, instantly needing to see this brand new Doctor interact with people that he knows from his past. You know, it's like the 10th Doctor regenerating at the end of the Parting of the Ways and then instantly going into school reunion. It's not something that the show's done before, but in turn, it means that once again we've had another incarnation of the Doctor where, thankfully, that post-regeneration weirdness has been removed. So hopefully, as we approach the Church of Ruby Road, we're going to have 15 fully formed, doing his own thing. I mean, we've got him in the trailer dancing in a club, so we're already going for a very different Doctor to what we've seen before. But I think that what we see from Ncuti within this story is a character that seems a bit more certain in himself and his identity. But at the same time, I do get the impression that this is going to be a Doctor that is haunted by something very particular. Maybe, who knows, it's something from his past. Maybe it could even be the return of the Timeless Child arc, which I think is probably unlikely given its controversy. But I think that this Doctor, as I say, is going to be haunted by something maybe of particular vulnerability, which would make this version of the Doctor quite unique. I just get the impression that maybe he's going to be quite happy and bold on the surface, but then when this Doctor is alone, it's going to be a slightly different story. But either way, what we see within this episode, I think, is a really promising start for a new incarnation of the Doctor. And I also think it's interesting because within a debut story, we normally need to have, or at least it seems to be designed like we need to have the big I am the Doctor moment. But with Ncuti's Doctor, we don't have that. We just have, I'm the Doctor now. Deal with it. It's instantly having a Doctor with confidence as opposed to seemingly having stories set up with them needing to prove themselves to the audience. And I'm certainly getting the impression that this era is just running with it, and I'm excited because of that. Ultimately, what this story does is it embraces the past, I think, particularly the Tennant era. It has some nice references to, you know, some of the classic series. It's not an anniversary special, which in keeps with the themes of previous years, which I completely get why people may not appreciate that, but it does also really hype up, I think, the new era as well. And as a result, I think, much like how I would go back and watch Series 1 or Series 2, that's my comfort era of the show. And I feel like that these episodes could also very much be that in the future. I feel like I willingly want to go back to these stories and watch them again, which is a good sign, and again, a feeling of which that I feel like I've not had for, maybe midway through the 11th Doctor era, probably. So there we go, that is my review of The Giggle, also concluding the 60th anniversary 3 episodes, which I'm very surprised that we've got to this point and I've actually reviewed all 3. I thought I would have dropped out by now. I very nearly did, I must admit, because it has been a very busy few weeks, but I've rather enjoyed coming back to do these episode reviews, and who knows, I won't promise anything, but if people want it, I may consider trying to review Ncuti's era from the Christmas special onwards. Who knows? I might try that, but I'm not promising anything. So thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day. Since it's very close to Christmas, Merry Christmas. I will of course see you all next time. Time for a cuppa.